Good. All right. So tonight is pastry stouts, and I guess people might wonder why I would do pastry stouts because I actually haven't brewed it all that much, probably less than a dozen times. Um, but I do enjoy style. I enjoy drinking them, and I don't know. I brewed twice with breweries, Definitive Brewing and Zoda Brewing up in Maine. And we got a second place out of 14 beers. So I figure not too bad. I enjoyed it. It's pretty good. Um, so as most of you know, we'll just start right out. There's no real BJCP category for pastry stout. Um, but it's a great beer. This isn't your parents' stout, also called batter stout. Pastry stouts are basically the New England IPAs of the stout world. They are heavy mouthfeel, they're thicker, and they go to extremes on their adjuncts, where New England IPAs go to extremes on their hops. Usually based off of an imperial stout. Um, also heard double milk stout, things of that, especially if they have lactose in them. They're much sweeter. Some people would think they're cloying. They have that real thick mouth feel. They're real viscous. I say that they're imperial. I would say the majority of them are in that 9 to 14% range. But I have had a couple of session ones that were quite tasty, and it's much harder to do. They're typically aged on multiple adjuncts. Usually you don't find just vanilla or just chocolate. Usually a combination. They're really targeting that, marketing aspect of this is a very specific dessert. This is coffee cake, something like that. And so you see vanilla, chocolate, coffee, coconut, things like that. Um, that's really kind of the definition of the pastry stout. These really big, bold, heavy flavors. They're thick, viscous, and lots of sugars. It's like eating a meal, but in a glass. But that's okay. Beer is different these days, not the same as it was 20 years ago. I enjoy them. Do what you want to do. For BJCP, you kind of, if you're going to enter this in a competition, it's very dependent on what you actually brew. As always, you enter the beer that you made, not what you set out to brew. If you have lactose, you should definitely claim it on the recipe, just because there are people who are lactose intolerant. You remember. But if you don't have to put lactose in your pastry stout, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have lactose in there. Also, if you're a judge and you're lactose intolerant, you should take a pill. Regardless, if it's very heavy on, say, like the vanilla or the cinnamon or something like that, spice herb and vegetable might be your spot. If it's super, super thick, super sweet, it might not fit into there. But you can also enter in clone beer or experimental beer. Had good results in all of those categories. So jump right into recipe development. In general, uh, anywhere from 50 to 70% is just regular two-row, whether it's just regular pale or Maris Otter. I often will switch out some of that for some Munich. And then usually you're going to have up to like 30% protein-rich malts. Oats, wheat, flaked barley, one that really helps with that viscosity, rye. And then I like to do a crystal malt mix, like a layer. So you layer in your low Lovibond crystals with slightly higher Lovibond crystals to really get the complex crystal caramelization going on in there. And then for dark malts, um, sometimes I'll use chocolate, but I often use more pale chocolate than chocolate. And then I like to stick mostly with my dehusked black malts because you don't really want any of that acridness that's going to be fighting the sweetness. So things like Carafa 3 work really well. Rather than black patent, I would suggest something like roast barley because, again, high protein, but it's not, it's still going to get you a little bit of that roasty acridness, but it'll also help with that thickness. As far as yeast goes, honestly, SO5 is what I hear from most of the breweries. That's kind of what they're using. Because when you're making these bigger beers, you want something that you can trust to fully ferment out. And then you're adjusting your recipe to finish at that higher gravity. But you want something that's not going to finish out like way too quick. Other breweries, I know that, what's that?
Do you have to adjust the pitch size for like the lactose or anything like that, or is it just pitch it as if it's the
Yeah, no, I mean, you need enough to pitch for the giant ABV that you're going for. So like it's not unheard of to, have to step this up 4 times to get that, 10 plus ABV. If you're shooting for 14%, you better have a lot of fucking yeast. But like I know Barreled Souls uses an Irish ale yeast, 17 something. I don't know if it's 26 or 62, something like that. Others use like English strains, maybe like 007, which is English, but it's also a little bit higher attenuator. I've also heard of people saying that you should co-pitch as far as like, oh, I'm going to pitch, a not very attenuated English yeast, like let's say 1318, and then I'll also pitch SO5 or champagne yeast or something like that. I, honestly, I don't see the point. I don't think it's worth the trouble. Just make sure that you have enough yeast to begin with. For water, I do like a New England IPA profile. So, higher on the chlorides, I'm trying to target that soft mouthfeel versus the bitterness aspects. For adjuncts, I'm of the opinion it's hard to add too much. Go fucking crazy. If you find that it's too strong, like I think a bunch of you guys had one that I had that had cinnamon and vanilla, and the cinnamon was crazy strong up front. But like after a month, it mellows nicely. Give it a little bit of age, and it will. It's an imperial stout to begin with. It needs a little bit of age. And age will mellow, and it'll kind of bring those flavors and melt them together. Don't be afraid of extracts. I know that, I think Trillium, for example, they use only natural ingredients. So they don't use, the extracts. But I think it was like I think it had more to do with baking, but I was reading a study and it was basically said that people in the US prefer, or North America prefer, like fake vanilla, artificial vanilla over like the real stuff. Whereas people in the EU were, they would use beans actually in their baking stuff. And I think a lot of times, that's the idea of the extracts is it picks the most prominent flavor that you're looking for, and it just throws that in your face, right? Like a hammer. It's just, this is what I am, like so for vanilla, it's all the vanilla, and that's all it is all the time. So, don't be afraid of them. If it gets you what you want, I love that they're easier to dose after the fact, and you can adjust things. And if you want, you can directly dose the glass that you're drinking. It's also a good way if you want to, make a big base and then test out a couple of pints. You can do that, before you start adding a bunch of crap to your stuff. A big thing, don't bother adding a bunch of shit in the mash unless you're Instagram famous and you want all the people to like how you're dropping all your shit in your mash. They see your graham crackers and your marshmallows and all that. So you kind of do that to like be fun. Honestly, it doesn't add a whole lot. You need the stuff that you're adding in there that looks really cool. You need to add a whole bunch of it to have any impact. Might as well, if you're gonna add like, even with like marshmallows, looks cool, but you know what? Just add it during the boil, have it dissolve quickly, and be done with it. Popular adjuncts, vanilla. I already talked about the, whether beans or extract. Personally, I've used both. I get my beans and my extract from the same place. I get it from Penzies, and their stuff is pretty high quality. Doesn't matter if it's the extract or beans, it's pretty high quality. If I'm looking to drop it in and just kind of let it sit, I'll use the beans. But like the beans can be anywhere from, I forget, it's like 15 or 20 bucks for 3 or 4 beans. It's not cheap. Whereas, you can get a nice 2-ounce thing of extract and it's about the same price, but it goes much further. And you can dose it however you see fit. For chocolate, you got nibs or you got liquid, right? And in the liquid case, it's Chelaka. I wouldn't add, like your actual chocolate bars and things like that. People do it. It's a lot of oils and other things that are in there that aren't necessarily great for your beer. You can probably get away with it because most people don't use enough. But if you decide to add, a whole case of chocolate bars, it's probably gonna not be great for the beer head and all that kind of stuff. I've used nibs. I've used the Chelaka, and thanks to a little tip from Phil Nervoso. He said 8 ounces of nibs for at about 350 degrees for about 14 minutes. And I confirm your house will smell amazing. I think I would definitely double that if I was looking for more chocolate flavor in the beer, though. The Chelaka, I'm a big fan of, but it's right now it seems hard to find. It's really expensive, and they're supposed to be selling on Amazon, but I don't know, you can't buy it unless you buy like 2 of them, and way expensive. But I had really good results. Great chocolate flavor. I mean, it is chocolate. It's just liquid form, but you can put it right in the keg. It's delicious. For cinnamon, cinnamon gets me to, there's a lot of different versions of cinnamon. You can use sticks. One of the tips that I got from Scott Casco, I don't know if any of you guys had the beer that he brewed for Homebrew Con last year. It was delicious. And he used this Vietnamese cinnamon, and it was delicious. So I went right out. I got some Vietnamese cinnamon powder from Penzies, and it doesn't take much. I think it was a half teaspoon. And a lot of you tasted my beer that I had that in, and it was overly cinnamon for a good month and a half. It was dominating, but I like it in a good way. The Vietnamese cinnamon really gives a almost spicy cinnamon quality, more like that, almost like a Mexican hot chocolate type of deal. Really tasty though. For coconut, it takes a lot of coconut to get that flavor. I've only used coconut a couple times, and I think the first time I used a little over a pound, and there was like no coconut flavor. But if you take like 2 pounds, toast it at say 325 degrees for 5 or 10 minutes, doesn't take long at all. You'll notice, you'll see it right away, start to brown up. But you'll get a lot of flavor, and you got to use a lot of it in order to get all that good coconut flavor. And it's one of those things. It's fine balance with coconut. you use like way too much, and or I don't know if you maybe if it's too oily, maybe I'm not quite sure, but you get like a suntan lotion kind of thing going on, and nobody likes drinking suntan lotion. But you know, if you like coconut, that's the thing. It's good.
Hey, TT, when you say 1 pound, is that in a 5 gallon batch, a 10 gallon batch? How big?
Yeah, I'm speaking 5 gallon batches right now.
Okay,
So like 5 gallon batch, I would use 2 pounds.
got it.
So this is sort of my base recipe. I came up with this on a brew day with Definitive Brewing, and it was designed for much bigger, so it's kind of scaled down. But it's as you can see, it's your mostly your pale two row and your Munich, a little bit carafoam, then pale chocolate, some Cara Munich, a little bit of Special B. I like Special B. That's a personal choice because I like sort of that dark fruit, raisin kind of quality to it. Craft 3. This is the Craft 3. These malts are more to get the color, get that dark stout color. Midnight wheat and roasted barley, right? Um, that those are added pretty much strictly for color. But at the same time, with the midnight wheat and the roasted barley, you're adding some more proteins in there. And then for like just straight, give me the proteins, make this thick. A little bit of flaked barley, flaked oats, flaked rye, and flaked wheat. So I brewed this with them. This is one of the ones that got second out of 14 beers with other. Was part of a pro-am, a bunch of other breweries, and I think I brewed this similar recipe with Mark. I don't know if I passed it on to Josh. I'm not sure if Josh has brewed anything similar to it yet. But it makes a nice little base, gets you
Not
pretty
yet.
thick. Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it gets you pretty thick without having to add lactose. You can certainly add lactose. It's not necessary. I like having the base without lactose. Lactose is one of those things you can pretty much add at any time. Certainly easier to add in the boil, but if you want to, you can pull off a little bit, heat it up, add the lactose, dose the keg. You can do that.
So that's a 5 gallon batch there.
Yeah.
That's like, so have you when you made that at home, what size mat? That's 30 pounds of grain, right?
It's a lot. Yeah. No, like I use I don't do this in the grain father. If I was doing the grain father, I'd probably make like a 3 gallon batch because it's so much grain. But I got some tips on doing that. It is a lot of grain. In general, because you want like a higher final gravity, like for me, like I don't, if I'm doing a pastry stout, like 1036 is pretty much the lowest I want my final gravity to be. For my regular imperial stouts, I like them at almost 1030. So, from pastry stouts, 1036 is the starting, and anywhere between that 1036 and honestly 1050, depending on what you're looking to do, is really your key final gravity. So you will often use twice as much grain as your normal batches of beer.
I assume you need a ton of rice hulls because you have like a ton of.
Honestly, I didn't have too many issues. We definitely had an issue when I brewed this with Mark. But that was because my filter just smushed under the weight of the grain, and it was years and years old. But Mark can probably testify to that. It was a giant pain in the ass. It was scooping things out and moving mash tuns, and right, Mark?
Yeah, we moved it to multiple mash tuns, and I think if you have 2 mash tuns, that's a nice way to go here, is to try and run half and half so that you don't have the overall compression moving things down. But again, I think that was just a one-off incident. But in general, if you have a couple mash tuns, I've brewed similar really heavy recipes with Maurice, not to finish quite as high a gravity, and we try and just distribute the grain across multiple tons so that you can keep the overall mass down.
As far as the process goes, so this is what I was going to get at. So with when you're brewing in something like a grain father or a smaller system and you want to make a full batch, there's a thing called reiterated mashing. It makes for a longer brew day, but it's nice because you can get really high gravity. The idea is that you do your first mash, and honestly, you can do anywhere between like 150 and 158, depending on what I'm trying to do. Sometimes I'll hit up at a 158, but if I'm doing a reiterated mash, I usually will actually mash a little bit lower because you're going to get such high gravity that you actually want it to be fermentable. The idea is that you do that first mash, and then if you're using like a cooler system or something like that, you go ahead and you drain your wort off, and then you remove your grains from your mash tun, and you add a second brand new mash in. With something like the grain father, it's pretty easy. You can just lift it out, and you've got all your grains are out, and dump the grain somewhere else. Fresh grain goes in the basket, drop that back in. And then you use the wort that you collected from the first mash to actually mash the second mash. And then you're gonna have to add a little bit of water in order to, sparge that out and kind of get up to your volume where you need. But what this does is it really concentrates the sugars, and this is how you get these, 1100 plus gravities, even on small systems. So even like something on the grain father, which, I can't remember what the max grain father grain is, but it's in that 16-pound range. So, you can do this and you can get double that amount of grain, and you can really get that OG up there. You're not going to get great efficiency doing this, but, it's in the scheme of things with the club, we have group buys, grain's fairly cheap in that sense. Don't be afraid to really add a bunch more grain in order to get to make up for that shitty efficiency.
So that's why you had like 35 pounds of grain on the previous slide.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you look back at a lot of these pastry stouts, I mean, is there a single pastry stout from Trillium that's under 12%? All the ones from Barreled Souls are, anywhere from that 12 to probably 17%. Like they're all really high up there. That's part of that is you have these really high original gravities, and then they can finish at 1050 and still be 14%. It's crazy. So yeah. So if you're looking for those really high gravities, honestly, reiterated mashing, it's a really cool trick to do. If not, there's a couple other ways to do it. There's when I did it with Mark, one of the things we did is we had a bunch left over from I don't know if that's our third runnings, I think, and put it on a pot and just let it boil, and you get lots of that caramelization, lots of those Maillard reactions, and it just, it's almost like you're making, candy sugar, right? And it just goes all the way down, and you've got this really, really strong concentrated wort that's, for the most part, it's mostly unfermentable. So you can add that at the end, and you can, bring that body and that sweetness and that thickness, you can bring that in the final beer. You can add that to it, and it'll raise that OG. It'll give you that thickness, and it's kind of a neat little thing. Something that a lot of people, they do that with like wee heavies or Scotch ales, right? So it's not like a new trick, but it's been around for a while. But it certainly changes the flavor of the beer. As far as the boil goes, once you get all that work, again, depends on the beer that you want to make. If you, uh, you know, boiling from anywhere from like an hour to 3 hours. You got the time, and you want to sit around, you want to let that boil down, and you want to get those caramelizations, and you want to concentrate those sugars, boil longer. A lot of us don't have time to boil for 3 hours, so we do some of these other tricks in order to get that gravity. Again, pulling off a gallon of the first runnings, concentrating that down definitely helps. If you want to add maltodextrin or lactose, that'll help with the body. It'll help raise that final gravity. Unless you get an infection, for the most part, most stack can't ferment that. So it's you can make it as easy as you want, much like homebrewing in general. You can make it as easy as you want, or you can make it as hard and technical as you want. Right? You can sit there all day if you want to brew a beer, but you can also wrap it up as quickly as possible. It's always an option. For fermentation, use a lot of yeast, but just follow their guidelines. Follow their window of temperatures. It's gonna be a lot of fermentation, a lot of sugar to eat through, and it's probably gonna generate a lot of heat. So if you have temperature control, all the better. If not, stick it in your basement, let it go. As I said before, shoot for final gravity no lower than 1036. I'd say there's a lot of commercial examples out there that are in that 1040 to 1050 range. I think Dark Lord, I've seen anywhere. I think that was close to 1080. Its final gravity, which is mind blowing to me. But that's higher than probably 90% of the beers that homebrewers make, right? Another interesting thing I've seen is secondary recirculation. It's not something I've done before, but I bring it up as a kind of cool thing that I heard about. And it's based off of the fact that breweries have special equipment. Any of you that have been on a tour at Trillium seen that they have special equipment to add their adjuncts to, and they can they add all the coconut. And if you ever saw the coconut when they're done, it's like there's nothing left. You put some of the coconut in your mouth and it has zero flavor. So there's one of the ways to do this is you get one of these self-priming diaphragm pumps, and they're like $20. And you basically you take it, you put in all your adjuncts, you put all the solids into a bag, and then you just you recirculate the wort back over the adjuncts, and it to the point where it just strips everything out of it. I haven't tried it. I don't know if it's actually practical on our scale or not. But I thought it was a pretty interesting idea. It's something I'd like to try in the next few months. So,
do you ever use like a masticating like blender to just make your adjuncts really small?
It depends. Like I said, for certain things, I use extracts. For other things, like if I'm not, with like vanilla, you could certainly, pulse that, but for the most part, splitting it and just cutting it up in 1-inch chunks never had any problems. I could see how if you were fruiting it, like say you're using raspberries or something like that, getting a nice puree would be super helpful. You want that, you want all the flavor, right? So you want all the juices from it. You want that pulp. Anything that's going to give you the flavor, you want all of it. So.
ET, have you done the secondary recirculation?
I have not. No, it's I think that was on an episode of Experimental Brewing, and they said it worked really well. But I have not messed with it. I thought it was interesting enough to put on here because it seems like a cool idea. Rather than just, throwing it in and hoping that it gets full coverage and everything like that. It makes sense in my mind with the special equipment that breweries have, that they'd be able to, throw them in there and pull all that out. But so it might be a cheap, easy way for us to do it. And I don't know, like it could completely oxidize your beer. But it seems to work, like once it's primed, it seems like it should be okay. I think there are some small technical challenges that you might have to look at, but if you're looking to get all the flavor, it could be rewarding. All right, so as part of this, I decided I would reach out to some of the pros that I like and that I feel like make pretty good pastry stouts. So I reached out. I meant to reach out earlier in the week. It was kind of a shit show of a week. I didn't get into it, but I did reach out today, and JC was pretty quick to respond, thankfully. And so here are some of his tips. He says, max out your mash tun, be super wasteful and just take the first runnings, do an extended boil. These are all things that are going to boost your OG, right? He says double the grain for half the yield. Don't use an excessive amount of simple sugars to bump your OG. Because, with anything, if you add simple sugar, it's going to ferment out. You're going to get a low final gravity, and it's going to taste really thin. Your mash and your grist depends on the yeast, but if using a Cali ale, you can mash in the low 150s. Target final gravities can range anywhere from 12p to 20p, depending on the brewer's intention. So, and I think you see that, like I said, 1036 for me is sort of the low end, but you see much higher gravities. JC's, obviously they brew plenty, but he's also worked with Jay Wakefield, who is well known for their big, thick pastry stouts. And the final gravities on those types of beers are just much higher. I also reached out to Barreled Souls, and I don't know if you know Barreled Souls, but they make Stay Puffed. And he said he almost always does the adjunct additions post fermentation. So they ferment the beer and they let it rest to try and get as much of the yeast off as possible. They bag everything and then they let it sit at room temperature. He said lots of trial and error as far as ratios or steep times, but he did give us some details on Stay Puft. They use 12 pounds of fluff per barrel, which is a lot of fluff. For other ones, they used about 10 pounds per barrel for nuts, 15 pounds per barrel of coconut, and about a pound per gallon for fruit purees. Usually shoots for about 70 for SRM darkness, and around half of that 30 IBUs. Uses roasted barley, kind of like that recipe I had, but tries to get most of the color from debitter black malts or midnight wheat. So again, like your Carafa 3, it's a great dark malt without the husk, right? Basically trying to avoid that astringency.
How much volume do you lose for adding stuff like fluff or fruit purees or stuff like that?
So for stuff like fluff, you don't really lose anything, right? Because it's fluff is basically sugar and gelatin and whatever, right? So, I mean, you're literally just adding more to it that's going to stick around in the beer. Whereas the other stuff will absorb, like coconut. I for coconut, that when I added up to like say 2 pounds of coconut, you will lose a good portion. It'll soak up quite a bit of beer. And so, like if you go into the fermenter with say 6 gallons, there's a good chance you're only going to come out with like 4.5 or 5 gallons at the end of it, between yeast and the adjunct soaking stuff up.
Another question where Chris says, after a long rest, to let as much yeast as possible die off. Have you had a problem with your adjuncts kicking in and doing a lot of fermentation again from the sugars?
I have not, but I also keg. So this isn't stuff I normally bottle. But at the same time, I've never had one start to re-ferment. But I also try to ferment everything out up front. I see breweries that add stuff, and they keep, they add all this stuff after fermentation, and then they like can it, and they tell you to keep it cold. I think that's a little ridiculous. I think it's just trouble waiting to happen, and I think that's it's kind of like poor process, basically. So treat yourself. This is dessert beer. Try to throw some crazy shit in your beer. It might be delicious. Might not be, but you never know. Finally, don't let the gatekeepers win. People are going to tell you not to do that, or they're going to tell you, why would you want to do that? You know what? If you want liquid diabetes, you make it. Don't let them tell you that that's not how they brew beer, that, this is completely ridiculous and it's not beer. You know what? Screw you. You make it, you enjoy it, you drink it. All right. That's what I got. You got any questions? Let me know.
What about haven't you done like the liquor, like pouring like flavored liquor into beer shortcut for some Pastry Stout?
I have. I did a stroopwafel stout, and I actually used a stroopwafel liqueur, and flavor was outstanding. I thoroughly enjoyed it. That was one of those beers at HomebrewCon last year, and it went pretty quick. The liquor does hurt your head retention, so you would get a bit of a head, but it dies pretty quickly. Also with the and I should throw in there with with that head retention, I actually carbonate my Pastry Stout just like I would any other beer. I think you can even push them a little bit further, because they are so thick. I feel like there's this perceived lower carbonation just because they're thick, even if they're just regularly carbonated. But I have no problem. Professional brewers can't like just readily add liquor to their beers, or they're not supposed to, right? But as a home brewer, we can do whatever we want, pretty much. If you want bourbon, you're not gonna necessarily age it in a bourbon barrel. It's great if you have one and you're able to do that. But add your bourbon in. If there are, there's lots of pineapple upside down cake vodka, worth a shot.
Is head retention even important with these beers? Like, I rarely see a big old Pastry Stout having a decent head.
I mean, I love a good head, on my beer in general. Is it gonna make or break the beer? I don't know, but like, for one that has good head versus one that doesn't, I'm always gonna be more impressed. And it's just whether that is visual bias, it's more impressive to me, and I'm probably gonna enjoy it more.
I mean, is it achievable with all these adjuncts you're adding?
Yeah, it is. You know what? Like, the one that I had with coconut, it had plenty of head. Wasn't a problem. I think if you added, one of the ones, peanut butter, if you add like straight peanut butter with all that oil, you're probably going to have problems. But you can use a peanut butter extract, like PB2 or something like that, which has more of a roast peanuts quality than an actual peanut butter quality. But you can also take that and you can add, you can take peanut butter with vodka, and it'll actually separate the oils, and you can pull the oils off, and then you can add just stuff with all the flavor. But like, unfortunately, that's the stuff with the oils is what, when people think of these flavors, a lot of that flavor comes from those fats and those oils. So you gotta work within what you're given.
DT, have you ever done any of the lower alcohol ones?
So I just started messing with that. So I got one right now that is carving up. Like I said, I was hoping to have it carved earlier in the week and have it ready for, like, say, porch pickup, but I just didn't get there. But yeah, I mean, it's harder from the aspect of you still want a high OG, a high FG, but you're not looking for that high of an OG, and most yeast strains can readily crush through a lower OG beer. So what I did is I used Hornindal and Kvike, and I boiled for 2 hours, and I mashed real high, I think 158 range, and it finished at 1036. So a little probably lower than I wanted, but the alcohol itself tends to add body to the beer. So you're fighting against having thickness and body on all fronts when you're doing a lower alcohol beer, and it's just you gotta do what you can. I think I probably should have pulled some off, boiled it, and added that back in separately. But it was one of those days.
Is there any reason you chose the Hornindal instead of Voss or something else?
Yeah, because I had it. I had it, and it was clean and actual yeast packets ready to go, versus the Voss that I have now is sitting in a jar, and that's ready to go, but it may or may not be pure Voss at this point. And it was last used in a really hoppy beer, and I figured, let me just go ahead and use the fresh Hornindal since I've got it.
Only reason I asked is some of the research has shown that one actually is a diastaticus strain and could probably finish lower than what you were anticipating.
Right. Yeah, I think given enough time, those diastaticus will suck, right? It'll just go right on. Some people like that, right? But I'm not making saison with it, and I also expect to drink it probably a lot quicker. It's not gonna be sitting on the shelves for a couple of months.
You have, like, with the yeast stalling out, or kind of closing out so high, do you ever have issues with it? How do you mitigate it, like cleaning up those off flavors, like acetaldehyde or diacetyl, anything like that?
So honestly, I haven't, on my pastry stouts at least, I've never had a problem with diacetyl. I'm pretty sensitive to it, so I'm assuming I just haven't gotten it. But as far as acetaldehyde, I can see that happening. You're generally, you can give it more time to clean up and to age and mellow. But if it's in there and you're not, and all your yeast is dead, then you're kind of screwed, right? But you could always, you can pitch some fresh yeast in there to see if it will help out and clean up. I've not had to do that, so I can't speak from experience that would definitely work, but I feel like it should.
What about maltodextrin?
Maltodextrin for me, in this case, I kind of treat it like lactose. right? If you want to boost body and you want to raise that final gravity, maltodextrin is a good way to do it. It's a good way to do it if you specifically want to not, you want to say that, oh, I didn't use lactose, right? Even though in my mind, they're basically the same thing. They're basically unfermentable sugar.
I don't think malto tastes as sweet, but yeah.
You think it doesn't taste as sweet?
Yeah, I don't think that has much flavor on its own.
No, I mean, I don't find lactose itself all that sweet. Although I do find that I almost feel like it has a more gritty flavor component. I know it dissolves completely, but like there's just something to be said that I can almost pick it up on the palate. And I don't get that with maltodextrin. So, I mean, you might have a point.
I guess the other thing would be beta glucans from like a flaked barley.
Say that again. What was that, Matt?
Beta glucans from flaked barley.
Like barley. I guess any other questions? You got any other adjuncts people are curious about, or?
Is there anything you haven't tried yet that you're thinking about in your back of your mind?
I don't know. So beer that I did with Definitive was we used Chelaka, so for the chocolate flavor, it's really good. We used vanilla beans and raspberry puree. We originally were going to do strawberry puree, and we were going to do kind of like a Neapolitan. That was our actual goal. But they sent the wrong thing and had raspberry, but you know what? It turned out delicious. The raspberry, that dark fruit, really pairs nicely with the chocolate. It was really, really good. And I think I posted something in the Slack not too long ago, and it was like a bunch of dessert flavor combinations of chocolate with vanilla and lime with coconut and things like that. So I've been looking at this wheel of flavors and trying to figure out what things can I pair up here that I would like to try in the future. Oh, and I could also do the let me see. I'm gonna stop sharing here real quick. It's the pastry stout generator, right? So one of these times I do want to try and actually hit the button, see what comes up, and then brew it, that weekend. Coffee and hazelnut, right? Delicious. There's Matt's favorite, juniper.
Juniper.
Banana, allspice coconut. I don't know, that sounds pretty crazy, but coffee, peanut butter, and vanilla, that sounds like a hit. I think that's basically what I'm drinking now, minus the coffee. This is like peanut butter cake. Cinnamon coffee, licorice coffee, pecan, dark rum. So I think it would be fun to hit the generator and then actually brew whatever it came up with, minus the juniper.
Iron brewer.
I think it would be great. We haven't done an iron brewer in a long time.
I support the iron brewer concept.
Cream cheese powder is something I want to brew it. Yeah, I want to brew with cream cheese powder.
Spruce anise.
Cream cheese powder.
I don't like anise, but
Is there
How many is the most, let's say 12-ounce cans or bottles you've drank of a pastry stout in a row?
In a row? Oh shit. So what is it? Armsby Abbey does their Stout Fest, and I'm not normally drinking a 12 ounce though. You know, it's usually like probably like a 6 to 8 ounce, maybe a 10 ounce pour. But it'd be embarrassing if I said the final number of how many I drank in one day.
DT,
Yeah.
what's your favorite pastry stout of all time?
Oh, my favorite pastry stout of all time. I got a special place in my heart for Stay Puft because I love that marshmallow. Favorite. That's a tough question. Man, put me on the spot. I don't even know. That's a hard one. That is a hard one.
Seems like a softball question for a pastry stout seminar.
It seems like it, but I mean, you asked me to choose like my favorite dessert, and I don't, like I don't really have a favorite, dessert.
All right, three you really like.
Who's RoboCop?
That was like RoboCop. It was good. I thoroughly enjoy the Trillium coffee cake. I got a handful of bottles of that, just kind of sitting away. This uses that Vietnamese cinnamon, which I'm a big fan of, and 14.4%. Can't really go wrong with that, right? Let's see. I had, I don't even remember the name of it, but I think it was Monday Night Brewing, and it was like a ladyfinger pastry stout, and it was fucking delicious. Nothing against Mark. Mark's was delicious too. But this was just like whole new level of thickness and everything, I often say that I don't add lactose very often because I enjoy making it without the lactose. But there is something to be said for when it's done correctly, that thickness, but like you really do got to reach up in that 14% range to really, really do it well, so there's that. I got to, and like I said, yeah. So I said that, and then the Stay Puft is one of my favorite. The bourbon barrel Stay Puft is like way back. I love that one. I feel like you can add bourbon to any pastry stout, and it's probably going to be better.
So go in the other direction then. What combination have you tasted that you've said never again?
Let's see.
Well, juniper, apparently.
Juniper, yeah. Juniper, if you're into that whole gin thing, you can do it.
You actually have juniper, or you're just imagining? I'm saying one you've actually tasted.
It's just from the generator. I thought it'd be fun to add that in as a flavor. Clearly, it pops up way too often. I think for me, one of the ones I wasn't a huge fan of is like orange and chocolate. I don't know why. Like it's, in candy, it seems like a really good flavor. But like the orange citrus chocolate combination doesn't do it for me. That might be a personal thing though. And and to take that further would be pastry stouts with the fake suntan lotion coconut is like the worst. It's like it coats your mouth and you can't get rid of it. I don't like that.
And going on that, DT, like mint chocolate, or think about chocolate bars in the supermarket, like sea salt caramel, all those. Do they translate to pastry stouts or not?
I mean, you can. The best thing I can say is you want to use that as like your idea and your goal, right? Like that's what you're shooting for. You don't necessarily want to use that actual thing in your stout because it's not going to come across like what it tastes like before you put it in. If you're going to do, you can certainly add something like sea salt to get you a little bit of that saltiness. But like, again, you don't want to add just straight candy bar in there because that chocolate bar is filled with a bunch of stuff that honestly is not going to do it for you. You're not going to get the chocolate flavor you're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, so you want to say like, okay, well, what about that do I really like? And then you want to start breaking out the individual components of taste and flavor that you're aiming for, and then you want to really amplify those. So like, all right, it's chocolate bar. So clearly chocolate. That's when, you know, you want to use some nibs, that's fine. I really like the chalaka, add a bunch of that in there. You can easily add some sea salt to make that a little bit salty, similar to like a gose, right? And then you can also add, you know, you can like special B, and if you want to you know, boil that down to get a little bit of that caramelization kind of thing, to add some caramel. You might probably don't.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's back.
Oh, he's back.
yeah. My VPN, you know, decided to try and turn on.
That's the FBI trying to access your IP.
I know. But no, I was saying, you know, like I haven't used actual caramel. I don't think it would really be a problem. I mean, it's mostly sugar anyway. I don't know how fermentable it would be. So it might not, you know, I think you'd probably have better luck adding some dark sugars or something like that. It will
Ramsey,
ferment out, but it might give you flavor.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I think like with the coconut chocolate stouts, you get that kind of Bounty bar or Mounds bar or whatever it is. But you know, you're not putting Mounds bars in there. You're putting in toasted coconut
Right.
and chocolate malts and maybe some nibs.
Yep.
Aren't there some other ways to get the coconut flavor in the beer without using actual coconut?
Sabro hops.
Sabro,
Some people say Sabro tastes like coconut. I mean, I definitely get a little bit of that tropical. I don't necessarily taste straight coconut. You know, I think Mark gets coconut a lot, but I get more of like a tropical flavor off it.
I get more of the suntan lotion coconut from it.
Do you?
I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
I don't think anyone likes it.
DT, it's in honor of you.
I just used Sabro in a porter, and Dave B had it, and it came off like pina colada. It wasn't suntan lotiony, or it didn't have that nasty flavor.
Yeah, we just used a little bit of it in some prototype batches at work. Got the same thing. It wasn't straight up coconut. It definitely was a little bit of pineapple tropical fruit in there, but it had that coconut aspect for us.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I say tropical, I mean, yeah, there's like, you know, moments of coconut, but it's not like, oh man, I just like bit into a fucking coconut. I think they tend to stretch what the descriptions of hops these days, you know, just a little bit.
X331, wafting notes of joint smoke.
Right.
Now known as Strata.
AKA dank as shit.
So what about nuts? I'm kind of thinking about making a pistachio beer. So what's your experience with using like whole nuts or other nut products?
So I don't use a lot of nuts because my kid is definitely allergic to nuts. But a couple of things, as I showed before, I think Chris from Barreled Souls says he uses as much as 10 pounds of nuts per barrel. That at least give you like a ratio. You want that surface area, so crushing them up will certainly help. I found that if what I've read as far as if you're going to use like whole nuts, like maybe hazelnuts or something like that, a lot of people will roast them, like put them in the oven and roast them, but they'll do it multiple times. So you do it, you know, when it's still enclosed, then you crack open the nut, you do it then, and then you break them all apart, crush them down, and then roast those again. So you get, you know, it's a chance for like the off gassing when you're roasting. Also gives a chance for some of the oils to come across, but you still get all the flavors and that you get from roasting. So I would definitely bag them if you can just throw them in, but that's just me.
Make sure to list them on your submission sheet if you submit them to a comp.
What's that?
So make sure to list that as an ingredient if you submit.
Yep.
DT, how long is your brew day when you do one of these pastry stouts? Because I see all these commercial breweries who talk about 9, 10, 12, like up to like 16-hour brew days because they do these insane boils. How long do you?
Yeah.
It's tough with kids, I'm sure, and you don't always do the longest, but.
Right. I mean, I tend to stick with like the 1 to 2 hour boils. So for the most part, it's not that long. But if I do a reiterated mash, it takes a while. I mean, you're mashing twice. You know, it takes a while. Like, you know, if I start at 6 a.m. and I'm hopefully done by like 2 p.m. But you know, I don't do the reiterated mash all that often. It's only when I'm like really shooting for those big high ABVs.
Is there any like pH problems with the reiterated mash?
I haven't found that. I treat the water. I treat it. You know, I add all my stuff to the initial water, and then I'll add it to the additional water that I'm going to add on top of that separately. But you know, I treat it like any other dark beer, where you gotta be a little bit sensitive to your mash pH just based off of having all the dark grains. But other than that, I don't do anything special. I'm not crazy about you know, pH or taking notes or checking ABV necessarily, or any of that stuff. So sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't do it. So I don't find that my stouts, you know, I don't find that the pH is crazy off. I feel like our MWRA water is pretty good, and you know, if you didn't do anything to your water, it's probably okay. I find that with the darker beers, if you want to adjust the pH, it's certainly really helpful, but it's not 100% necessary.
I have a question. Ramsey
Okay,
wanted to
Doug.
ask this question, but I'll do it. Have you used any smoked malts?
I have, and because it's the smoked malt that Ramsey gave me, I actually added a small portion of it to my last one because I was going for a s'mores, and I wanted to get a little bit of that smoked malt in there for for that little bit of burning flame action. So
How did it turn out?
I'm hoping it turns out great. I just started carbonating it, so it tastes good, but you know, I really want to have some carbonation on it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think you can go wrong adding a little bit of smoked malt if that's what you're going for, especially if you play up the campfire theme.
This is going back to the water chemistry thing, but have you ever added carbonate or bicarbonate to balance out the acidity from the black malts?
Not usually. I usually add the calcium chloride. I will add some lactic or phosphoric acid. That's pretty much it. You know, a couple salts. I don't add too much. I try not to add too much. I don't normally use the pH meter. I have one, but even then, occasionally I'll occasionally check it. But it's so far in between using it that I don't actually trust it most of the time. And if I'll follow up with some paper. You know, the paper strips, which are god awful, but they almost always read in that, you know, no lower. You know, not usually. They're usually in that 5.4 range, let's say, which I'm okay with. So I'm not going for a pills. I don't need it to be very exact.
Hey, are there any adjuncts that you will soak in alcohol to extract the flavors instead of just putting them straight into your beer?
I've done that with vanilla. I've done it with nibs because the first time I used nibs, somebody gave me like a giant 5-pound bag of nibs, and the first beer I put them
Was it
into
Vince?
they got fucking the beer got infected, and I was so pissed that I basically was like, never again. That might actually have been what put a bad taste in my mouth for nibs, but I'm coming back around to it thanks to Phil. But yeah, it's vanilla can, if you, rather than just, if you're not gonna like age it on the vanilla beans, then throwing them in some vodka is a better way to extract all that flavor. So that's
What have you done for coffee, DT?
coffee. Usually I do cold brew. So usually I'll cold brew up and add that to it and make it, you can make it pretty intense.
Just to the keg.
Kind of just right into the keg. Yeah.
Are most breweries doing like that, like at the actual cold brew coffee? Or are they doing like coffee beans?
That's how
I think a
we've
lot of
done
them
it.
are adding yeah, they're adding beans. Like they're like, it's almost like a dry hop, right? But they're like, I call it cold beaning, right? So they're put them in, and it's but they're not like making hot coffee with it. So they're just putting the beans in it, room temperature, fermentation temps, whatever, and that helps pull out a lot of the stuff without pulling off a lot of the bitter, acrid parts of the coffee.
Garrett, what were you saying as well?
I was going to say that we've also only done small batch coffee stuff. It's not like we haven't even done full 10-barrel batches of anything for our pilot system. So the coffee stuff that we've done has always been cold brew, but I'm talking 3 barrels at the most. So the logistics of making enough cold brew for a 160-barrel batch, it's easier to just put the beans right into the fermenter for that.
Is that why you guys, to everyone, you think we're seeing a lot of like breweries that are now trying to be like roasteries now? Like Troy Yim's done it, Treehouse has done it. A lot of the bigger breweries are starting to like.
I don't think it really has to do with the ability for the coffee for the beer. I think it's just one of those things that coffee roasting is a craft lifestyle that's coming up the same way that homebrew did. They just kind of go neck and neck. Yeah, and also like a lot of the people that patron like all the patrons of the breweries usually are kind of craft coffee people as well. They
gives you something you can sell in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah, you got Winter Hill basically having their cafe in the morning, the brewery at night. Lovejoy, same thing. It's a good business model to keep the doors open longer during the day.
Lovejoy's done, man.
I heard that.
Here's a pastry stout for the fall, DT. I got my fermented acorns.
Nice. I've heard that's a good thing though. Like, was it Sapwood, like Michael, that did that?
I was at Sapwood Cellars, and like the bartender was like I was there like the week before their anniversary party. The bartender's like, "Oh, you want to smell something cool?" And he gave me this like mason jar with like a couple acorns in it, and it was just this huge fucking like melanoid, like deep flavor. And then like I looked it up, it's just on Tonsmeyer's blog from like however many years ago. And so I just went out and a bunch of acorns and fermented them. You smell something cool?
Maybe you can hold on to it, and then when all this is over, we'll brew with it.
My idea was like I don't want to decide how to use them. I want to get like people together that know more shit than me.
Good luck. Brewing with acorns is super popular.
I have two of these jars of them though.
All right.
Hey, Vince, white oak or red oak? I think the red is a lot more tannic.
I just walked into the fells and started picking up acorns.
Okay.
White oaks. From his pictures, I'm pretty sure they're white oaks. They're pretty big.
They ferment like they were like I had like ball jars on. I think this one actually like broke the metal part a little.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. They ferment without any water or adding anything to it, right? They start to ferment from the inside out.
Yeah, you just pop them in. The ones that they had in the bar were they were mine haven't got there yet, but they were this really dark brown. They almost looked like you could pick it up and bite it. These haven't got there, so maybe they soaked theirs in water or something to express them more. But I don't know. Sounds like a good pastry stout.
Uh-huh.
As far as stouts go, pastry stouts, any kind of stout, how are they affected by oxygenation or oxidization? Because I've only brewed New England IPAs and it's the fucking worst. Is it
Right.
more
Well,
of a
so
if I decide to go into stouts, or is it going to be a nice reprieve?
I mean, too much oxygen for any of these can be a problem, right? But
Sure.
it depends how long you're aging them, right? So, if you've ever had I don't know if you've ever aged any stouts, but we've done a handful of stout tastings within the club, and it's really hit or miss on how they deal with age. So you might have one, and it could be 5 years old and tastes pretty good, but then you might have another one that's 2 years old and tastes like straight trash. Because oxidation, there's a difference between that gross wet cardboard action and a bit of that cherry melanoidin type of thing that can happen, right? So it's there's multiple flavors that can come out of oxidation, and the kind that you get,
Soy sauce.
right? Soy sauce, which to a degree might not be that bad. It might be complementary. If it's all
I want
you
you to
can
go get a
taste.
5-year-old worldwide stout and tell me it's complimentary.
I got one down in the basement, but it's from
That right here.
it's from early 2000s. I think 2003.
So it sounds like over years it can take effect. But I know for me, New England's, it's it could be in 2 weeks I could have a fucking 5-gallon keg of shit.
Right, but you got with New England, you've got there's so much more opportunity with all those hops to have an oxidative reaction, right? It's already in there and it's just compounding. Every time you do something, it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
Whereas with the stout, there's so much going on there that it doesn't come across the same way. You're not using a lot of hops.
Gotcha.
So those proponents aren't oxidizing.
And you didn't mention that. What bitterness do you, or maybe you did, I missed it. What bitterness do you target for in the pastry stouts?
Depends on the beer, but I'm usually in between, probably around 40 IBUs is what I usually target. I will go as high as 60 IBUs if I'm doing really, really big one, and say I'm shooting for closer to a 1050 FG. I'll definitely bump it up because you got to have a little bit of balance there. But I mean, this thing is, bitterness can come across weird in those thick pastries. And honestly, a lot of times I'll just, I'll use my, I have some of those bittering oil, the hop oil that can be used. You just dump it, it's 10 IBUs per milliliter, right? I'll use that because I've got 30 fucking syringes of it. But Eric, I know that the last time we did a really big stout tasting, I think one of the things that we were all kind of agreed upon was that the sweet spot was, 2 to 3 years old. Still tasted good. There was a lot of flavors that the fresh ones didn't have, that it either had mellowed or developed. But after that, it was a very sharp, run right off the ledge of a bunch of terrible beers after it had age on them. But then you would have these bright spots where you'd have a 14-year-old one, and it blew your mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't really age a lot. I like if I like something, I just want to drink it right away. I don't know.
Because you're an alcoholic.
Nah.
I'm just messing with you.
Eric,
I like it.
that is a New England IPA profile to drink it right away. So you need
Yeah, but
you need to brew something else that you can age for a little bit.
You obviously were never a member of the Night Shift Barrel Society.
So my two favorite styles are New England IPAs and the pastry stouts. And if it's a massive coconut like bomb, I kind of like that. That's why I want more of it. So if I let it mellow out, like I don't know, I just dumped out the peanut butter PM Don Trillium because it was like a year old and it just had the peanut butter was gone.
Yeah. If you want to start cellaring beer, I can sell you a starter pack of beer that's sitting in my cellar.
Oh, why does it feel like less like you're doing me a
you got
favor,
that,
and more
yeah.
like I'm doing you a favor?
This one's not a pastry, is it? Oh, there we go. What the fuck?
You got that.
Prairie
That's some
bomb.
good shit right there.
Very well.
Yeah, but that's not a pastry, is it? Because I definitely got this when I was still living in
definitely not
Albany.
pastry.
They
Okay.
have variants of it that are pastry, right?
Yeah, it's got a lot of different flavors on
be,
it, but this has been sitting in my cellar for like 5 years.
Pop it. Do it live.
There's some of that too.
Soy.
No idea what it tastes like.
You never had it?
I don't think I've had that one. No, I've never had Prairie Bomb.
That's some good shit. I think it can take some age, definitely.
It's 13%. Jeez.
I don't know if I've had 5 years, but they're pretty reliable. The Prairie Bombs, but definitely not pastry. It's more like chili chocolate.
Right.
Yeah, not sweet.
And to that point, I would say, the peanut butter beer that you had, Eric, I wouldn't really classify that one as a pastry stout. I mean, it's more of like a regular American stout with adjuncts, right? But it's not, it doesn't really fall into that thick, viscous, sweet, overly sweet dessert
this
category.
has lactose in it at least. Whereas that one is more, you're probably right, more of like a roasted. Like,
Read the guidelines.
What?
Tell Matt he needs to get on writing the pastry stout guidelines.
Matt's our resident. If the style doesn't exist, he can write it.
I only did New England. I feel like DT should do the pastry stout.
Either way, Gordon will change a few words and make it his.
So one of the things I really wanted to do for tonight, and I didn't get to it because, again, as I said, this week was a shit show. Was I've been scraping Beer Advocate's beer list, and so I have all the pastry stouts that are rated pretty high, and I wanted to do a little bit of analysis as far as ABVs, flavor combinations, things like that. Could be interesting, might not tell us anything, but I was hoping to get to that. I just didn't get not enough time. But I have all the files if anybody wants them.
Garrett,
Nobody's jumping at that.
Yeah. Has Lord Hobo done anything pastry wise? I think you guys had the one with
We did one earlier this year, but it wasn't too complex of a pastry stout, and I honestly like the final, like how the beer ended up. It's very loosely a pastry stout. Like it was a lactose fruited stout essentially.
Okay. Yeah, the fruit stouts are just really, I think, can be hit or miss too.
Yeah, and adding the fruit also kind of takes away from a certain aspect of the pastry stout because it's going to thin the beer out. You're going to take away that final body that you're kind of looking for to really have a full pastry stout.
Right.
Yeah, ours was more of a dessert stout than anything else. Like,
unless you're like really factoring that fruit into the ABV, and you can use enough of it to like push the flavor beyond what it's fermenting at.
Yeah, but at the same time, like any of that fruit addition, just the way we always viewed it is you view it as a dextrose addition. You view it as a sugar addition. So you're adding simple sugars that are going to thin the beer. And
100%.
Even in your presentation, you said, like JC said, like that is something that you do not want to do.
Right.
So for pastry stouts, it's just not. Yeah, that's why you don't really see fruited pastry stouts all that much. They always have spices because the spices aren't going to.
But there are certain fruits that like the flavor can really come across. Like I said, there are certain, if you were to use strawberry, it doesn't really, it's too light of a flavor and you have to use a lot of it and it will thin the beer out, right? So I'm always impressed when somebody manages to get real strawberry flavor into a beer without using extract. Raspberries are great.
Extract.
Right, say they're not. Raspberries, I think, is a great one because it's so flavor forward. So raspberries, blackberries, some of those dark fruits can really, even once fermented out, leave a lot of flavor. But again, it's very fruit dependent, I think.
One thing I don't think has been mentioned, but I've read a lot about different breweries doing this, is they do blends. They'll brew up like a massive, like their base beer they know is good, and then they'll do one with kind of like with that adjunct and they'll blend it. Because I think the idea is, like you said, adding fruit, it could be a little bit thinner or like a smaller yield. Have you guys tried that, doing any kind of blended stouts?
Not really. I mean, we've blended things, but that's more of a logistical thing that we build into some of the more complicated beers that we brew. Just this is getting into the weeds on it, but sometimes the sales and marketing side need to have labels and marketing stuff done before we have even started to brew the beer. So you don't necessarily know what it's going to end like, and they have to have ABVs that they can market to people, labels that they can start getting approved and printed. So if the final product doesn't end at what you told them and what they've been advertising to the public, then you have to have a contingency where you can blend other things together to actually hit that target that has been advertised to the public. So yeah, for like a really big high alcohol beer, if it ended up low alcohol, we would have a similar but higher alcohol beer ready in the wings to blend into it to bump the ABV up. Or similarly, we would have, as disgusting as this sounds, some lactose water that is de-aerated that we would blend into it to build body up and lower the alcohol. So like there's contingencies that we build in to kind of hit those targets, but that's also like very, very, very specific cases for one-off beers that we have never brewed before and never will again, that we have to have marketing material before we've even brewed it.
I find that fascinating, actually. Like, what would you do if you hit the nail on the head? You got the first ABV right. That other batch of beer.
I mean, yeah, most of the time we do, and so like that other batch would just kind of go away.
All right.
Like, damn near all the time it actually happens. So that other stuff, like we would, and sometimes we don't even need to brew it. It's the high alcohol stuff we might be brewing anyway. Like if we're doing the stout or something like that, we would have Godmother, our 12% imperial stout, ready to blend into it. Oh, we don't need to blend into it. Well, let's just package Godmother because that's already a brand we have. The lactose water thing is more like we can do that the day of. We don't need to have that waiting. We just like when we need it, we can do it that day.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
DT, back to home brewing pastry stouts. Do you brew 5-gallon batches? Do you keg it? Do you bottle it? How do you get rid of it? Do you drink 5 gallons of 15% beer?
Yeah. So it depends on which system I'm brewing on. I tried brewing it on the Grainfather, and you can't, unless I do a articulated mash, you can't hit that OG, right?
I was really more talking about like if you end up with 5 gallons of a 14% beer, what do you do
You'd
with
be
it?
surprised. You'd be surprised, like
you work hard.
Again, it's one of those things you don't. I have a pretty big chest freezer, and I can just put it in there, and I can just let it hang out. And you know what? 6 months later, it still tastes really good. I've been known to redose certain flavor, like if it's got cinnamon, I might redose some of the cinnamon just to give it a little boost. I've got some vanilla extract. I got almond extract. I got a couple of these things that I can sort of dose at will if I want to give it some fresh flavor. But for the most part, yeah, like I try to end up with like 5 gallons in the keg. I will often end up anywhere between 4 and 4.5, depending on how much got soaked up. But yeah, I mean, prior to this, it's surprisingly easy to have people drink it. A lot of people love really sweet beer, evidently. So kind of is what it is. I don't normally bottle it unless I'm bringing it to like a meeting.
You mentioned almond. I love almond. Does it work? Do you do it straight or do you combine it with other flavorings?
I combine. Honestly, I don't think I've ever brewed a pastry stout with a single adjunct flavor. Maybe I should try that, but I don't know. I can't really think of too many desserts that are only a single flavor. They're usually a combination, right? But almonds, I feel like almonds one of those sort of, dark flavors that I really like. So I think you're muted, buddy.
Other than, thank you. No, every time I went, it moved again. Other than chocolate, that's always what comes to mind for me with almond. I don't know what else to pair it with. That's kind of
Definitely vanilla. I would have no problem trying to combine almond and coconut. Trying to think. That nutty flavor. I could see that even with like maybe like a lemon flavor. I think that could be interesting.
But when you mentioned extracts, you gave me a good idea, which is I've got my sweet stout. I can pour it and dose just a little bit of extracts to taste what it'd be like before you try to brew something. I like.
That's how I started figuring out where I should start dosing at. Is I would basically pour off, a half a pint, and I would pull off a couple of half a pints, and then I would dose them. And like this one gets 1 drop of this one gets 5 drops, right? And see if if the 5 drops, if that's way too much flavor, it's completely dominating, but the 1 drop's not quite enough, then you find your common ground, then you work out the numbers, right? That's how I've actually almost always been able to figure out how much I should be dosing things.
But I'm also thinking for flavor combinations, you could have a lineup of 1-2 ounces and do the different combinations to find out what really pairs.
I'm a big fan of the dosing, of the glass, right? So like if you make a chocolate pastry stout and then you want to add your almond or whatever extracts in the pint glass, go for it. I mean, you can basically have a different pastry stout every night.
Thank you.
And glitter.
And glitter. I see you, Garrett. What's up? So my question to you guys, how many of you guys have actually, how many of you all have actually brewed a pastry stout?
Closest thing
I
I did.
brewed the Black Forest Stout in the Brewing Classic Styles book a long time ago. It didn't turn out that great.
Brewing Classic Styles as a pastry stout?
Well, it's like a Black Forest Stout, so it's like chocolate and cherry.
Okay, yeah. Do you remember why?
But I don't think it doesn't have the same like really high gravity and sweetness that your beers do.
I mean, I tell you, number one problem with breweries' pastry stouts is the thinness. If it's a thin beer, when I go into it thinking pastry stout, I'm thinking it's going to be thick, it's going to be viscous, and I want that. And if it's 10-20, that might seem like a high OG or high FG. It's not going to be good. It's not good for a pastry stout.
Yeah,
too thin.
Yeah, I've done plenty of like roasted coconut and coffee and chocolate nibs, but never on on the level of a pastry stout ABV or a finishing gravity. But no, I'm interested. I'm keen.
Phil, you brewed one? I know you got the nibs going.
Yeah, I've dabbled in a few. I got two
Yeah.
in the keg right now.
Okay.
My problem with them is they stick around forever. Like 5 gallons of 15% cake batter.
I love it.
Like it
It will
just,
mess you up.
yeah, it takes a long time for one individual to work their way through that. So I like,
If I ever go back to work, I'll take some of that off your hands, man.
yeah, mine is like, I think 3 years old and 2 years old at this point.
I'm up for some porch pickups, man.
I know I should be more generous, I guess.
Yes, you should.
Yeah, it sounds like you need some help, and I'm here to help.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right. Any other questions? I'm gonna stop recording and let you mongrels drink it up.
What do you mean, you mongrels?